Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Prime Minister-elect Naftali Bennett calling on incumbent Benjamin Netanyahu to let go of his position with grace. Meanwhile, tensions in Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem rising again as Hamas terrorists resume their incitement. And finally, Israel honoring its healthcare professionals in a landmark ceremony marking the end of COVID in the country. To delay or not to delay, that is the question. Likud MK and Knesset Speaker Yariv Levin reportedly considering calls to convene the Knesset on Wednesday for a vote of confidence, a necessary vote for swearing in a new coalition. But this amid other reports of Levin possibly continuing to delay the vote for as long as possible in order to provide more time for the so-called change bloc to crumble. Prime Minister-elect Naftali Bennett from the Yamina Party, however, appealing to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to let go and to allow the country to move on. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in office now for 12 years, fighting hard to maintain his position, continuing to accuse Yamina chair and Prime Minister-elect Naftali Bennett of the biggest election fraud in the history of Israel, perhaps in the history of democracy.
אני מחפש דבר מקביל, יש לי כמה חוקרים, לא מצאו הונאה כזאת, אין דבר כזה. ולכן אנשים מרגישים בצדק, מרומים, הרבה מאוד, והם מגיבים לזה. אי אפשר לסתום להם את הפיות, ואסור לחסום חשבונות פייסבוק וטוויטר רק כדי להשתיק את הביקורת נגד ממשלת ההונאה הזאת. ואני קורא להם, ברגע הזה, ברגע מאוחר, אבל לא מאוחר מדי, להתייצב ולהצביע לפי מצפונם, נגד הממשלה הזאת שמסכנת את מדינת ישראל, סכנה שלא הכרנו שנים רבות. ובכל מקרה אני רוצה להבטיח שאנחנו, חבריי ואני כאן בסיעת הליכוד, נתנגד בתוקף להקמת ממשלת ההונאה והכניעה המסוכנת הזאת, ואם חלילה תוקם, אנחנו נפיל אותה מהר מאוד.
Netanyahu also then condemning the incitement against his political rivals, but alleging that he and his family have for years faced worse. In any case, several members of the new pending government have had to have their security details strengthened over the past week. In fact, law enforcement officials also going so far as to give warning calls to individuals who are spreading political incitement online, adding that they may even carry out preventative detainments in order to preempt violent acts. Meantime, Prime Minister-elect Naftali Bennett responding to right-wing rhetoric, calling for clearer condemnations while also pleading with Netanyahu to maintain grace in the face of his potential defeat.
אני קורא מכאן למר נתניהו, תרפה, תשחרר את המדינה להמשיך הלאה. מותר לאנשים להצביע בעד הקמת ממשלה, גם אם אתה לא עומד בראשה. ממשלה שהיא אגב 10 מעלות יותר ימנית מהנוכחית. מר נתניהו, אל תותיר אחריך אדמה חרוכה. כולנו, כל העם, אנחנו רוצים לזכור את הטוב, את הרבה טוב, שאתה הבאת בעת השירות שלך, ולא חלילה רוח רעה שתותיר עם פרדתך. אני מבחינתי אמשיך לנהוג בך בכבוד. אני פונה מכאן ליושב ראש הכנסת יריב לוין. תקבע ליום רביעי הקרוב את ההצבעה להקמת הממשלה.
So far, however, the published agenda for Wednesday leaving out a vote of confidence in the Knesset, making it most likely then that the vote will be called at the last minute on Monday, June 14. So does Israel's new pending coalition really constitute the greatest fraud in the history of democracy? Joining me to find out, former Labour Party Knesset candidate Dr. Amir Kanifs and attorney Ziv Maor, legal counsel to the Hallel Likud Forum and Im Tirtzu. Ziv, I'll start with you. In what way is this a fraud? Is it just because Bennett has 6 to 7 seats, much fewer than Lapid?
No, this is not the issue. Okay, according to Israeli law, you can become prime minister if you have the support of 61 members of the Knesset, and this is the case with Bennett. This is not the reason why this is a fraud. The reason is that he gave a promise to his potential voters that he will sit with Netanyahu. And if he would have not given this promise, he would have not been elected whatsoever. We all remember that just in 2019, Bennett's party at the elections of 2019 didn't pass the threshold to become elected to the Knesset at all. Without those voters who moved from the Likud to Yamina because of Bennett's promise, he would have not been elected to the Knesset whatsoever, let alone become a potential candidate for prime minister.
Amir, how do you respond?
Well, Bennett made it clear through his campaign, actually, that it's time for a change. And he tried all other options before he managed to have and to form these elections with, of course, the Labour Party and the Merits. But that doesn't mean there has been a fraud. In the end of the day, we all know that prime ministers or candidates for this office are negotiating the process through after the elections. And what Bennett managed to do is just to form a coalition, which obviously is against the wish of the right camp. But at the end of the day, it's not a fraud, because he also talked through all his campaign about time for change. And that's what he's been doing now through forming this election.
So what do you make of the fact that at the same time, as we just heard a moment ago, he said that, Naftali Bennett, he said that the government would be 10 degrees further to the right than the current one. What do you say to this claim, then?
Well, let me say it in a way that that if it's clear that no one has managed to receive what all his requires from this government. Neither the parties from the left wing nor the parties from the right wing. In the end of the day, we are talking about a government that has compromises. But I think what he meant, that it's clear that this government won't be able to achieve what the left-wing parties wants to see in the future. And that's clear also to us. We understand it. As Merav Michaeli said from the beginning, having Naftali Bennett as prime minister is not of her dreams, and it's clear for us. But on the other hand, we are all understand that this government is going to be kind of a compromise of different political agendas that we all trying to form, where we believe that changing Netanyahu from the prime minister office is one of the biggest achievements that we want to have through this government.
All right, so Ziv, I want to give you a chance to respond. Now, you've already mentioned that you do believe that this is a fraud and a betrayal of the right-wing voters, particularly Yamina.
Betrayal is your term, I didn't use it. Okay,
I'm summing up. Do you think that Bennett could win back some of his supporters with good policy as prime minister, or is it too late?
No, I think that it's not a question of good policy. Bennett is not capable of good policy. He was a minister for the past decade, and we've seen his performance. He's a poor politician. He has got no achievement whatsoever.
Not that poor of a politician.
No, that's the point. My counterpart just said this is something that Bennett managed to do. Bennett, even now, is managing to do nothing. He's a puppet. He's being used by the left. The left have, in Israel, understood that the only way to take Netanyahu down, to take the leader of the Israeli right down, is to find a puppet from the right. This is the only way to do that. This is how bad the shape of the left in Israel is currently. Bennett is doing nothing. Bennett would have not managed to achieve any of this and is not going to be prime minister for long, regardless of how long this government is going to stay, because he's done with his political career. His only potential of surviving as a politician in Israel is crossing the line entirely to the left and getting the left of the leftist and extreme leftist voter. This is the only way for him to survive another term. He will never gain the trust of right-wing voters ever again.
Amir, do you agree that to save his political career, Bennett must go further to the left?
Not at all. I'm quite surprised. Actually, I was sure that our colleague was going to congratulate us for forming such a beautiful government after so many years that Israel has no government, for at least more than 2 years, and after 4 rounds of elections that none of the candidates has managed to achieve and to form a government. And finally, after more than 2 years, Bennett and Lapid and Merav Michaeli and the leaders from different sides managed to come together and to form a government. And that's something great for Israel, for Israeli society, and of course, for Israeli economy. No one really wanted to go for another round. And what we managed to do is, in fact, to take Israel out of this chaos. But it's clear that for the Likud and some members of the Likud, unless you have Bibi Netanyahu in the prime minister office, that means there is no government in Israel. There's no Knesset. There is no other institutions that can run this country. And that's the wrong thing about them. Whereas Bennett said yesterday, well, Israel could have also government that Benjamin Netanyahu is not standing at its top. And what's the issue here? I think, finally, it's clear for everyone from the results that we had in the recent elections that neither of the two camps has a majority. We had 4 rounds. It's not 1, it's not 2. We had 4. And it became very clear to everyone that there is no way that any of these sides or these camps going to form government without the support of the other side, or one party or two.
I will shortly respond to that, Amir, that, well, what the other side fails to understand is that forming government is not an end. It is a mean to execute ideology. And once the left achieves this goal of taking away Netanyahu, they will have to agree on stuff to do with the power given to them by the Knesset. And there is nothing practically and ideologically that can be agreed upon by this government. Now, as for the result of the last election, you can say that there is a majority in the Knesset to take Netanyahu away, and there is a majority in the Knesset for a right-wing policy. Now, the center has to compromise. Will they compromise on ideology, or will they compromise on personality? And we got the answer. They insist more on kicking Netanyahu away than executing the ideology that they were voted to execute. And this is the issue. Those politicians preferred politics over the choice of their constituents, and they will pay for it in the next election.
All right, well, with that, I think we have to end it. But Ziv Maor, Amir, thank you so much.
Thank you.
In other news, amidst stalling ceasefire talks with Gaza-based terror group Hamas officials in Gaza calling for Palestinian days of rage against Israel at flashpoint locations across the region. Hundreds of Palestinians across the West Bank and East Jerusalem answering the calls from Hamas to engage in violent conflict with Israeli forces. Just outside of Shechem or Nablus over the weekend, for one, Palestinians on a hillside lighting fires and whipping stones at Israeli forces who responded with crowd dispersal measures. That said, not all demonstrations are including violence per se. Several protests as well as violent riots popping up in apparent support of the 70-some Palestinians facing eviction in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah over decades of refusal to pay rent. A long, ongoing, and now repeatedly delayed legal dispute used as fodder for Hamas to incite violence, like the 4,000 rockets fired into Israeli civilian communities from Gaza during the conflict between Israel and Hamas last month. In any case, pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests, including a marathon through East Jerusalem and daily demonstrations in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, as well as outside Israeli police headquarters. Israeli police, for their part, responding with arrests and riot dispersal methods, including spraying skunk water, flash grenades, and sponge-tipped bullets. Several arrests in particular sparking widespread controversy, however. Israeli police detaining and then releasing Palestinian twin activists Muna and Mohammed El-Kurd, who between them have roughly 2 million followers on social media. Muna El-Kurd specifically detained in her home over alleged participation in riots. Then meanwhile, in a second controversial incident, Al Jazeera reporter Givara Bouderi forcefully detained shortly after covering a sit-in protest. Her cameraman's equipment destroyed and her arm broken during the altercation, prompting a rare rebuke from the Foreign Press Association. Israeli police and eyewitness accounts alleging that Bouderi was arrested for refusing to identify and then assaulting officers. Bouderi, however, rejecting the accusations, claiming to have been refused the opportunity to get her press pass from the car, and video of the arrest showing Bouderi wearing a clearly marked press vest. Meanwhile, as Palestinian incitement to violence growing once again at the hands of Hamas, Palestinian Authority officials not doing much better. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas on Sunday ordering the payment of over $40,000 to the family of terrorist Muhannad Halabi, who in 2015 stabbed to death Israeli Rabbi Nechemia Levi and Aaron Banita, as well as injuring Banita's wife and 2-year-old son. And this, the first major public return to the PA's pay-for-slay policy since President Biden took office in January. Senior Palestinian officials previously having said that they'd alter their terror stipends policy in efforts to improve ties with Europe and the United States. Joining me now to discuss is international relations expert with the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Dr. Navon, thanks so much for being with us. Now, what prompted this payment, and how is the Biden administration going to respond to it?
Well, hopefully the Biden administration will make it very clear to Mahmoud Abbas and to the Palestinian Authority that they cannot enjoy the best of two worlds. They cannot expect the United States to reopen the PLO's institutions and representation in the United States, to renew the funding for UNRWA, and then let the PA basically encourage terrorism by paying money, and quite big amounts of money, to families of terrorists. So I think that it is the responsibility and the duty of the Biden administration to send a very clear message to the Palestinian Authority. And by the way, this amount of money, don't forget that a few dozen thousands of dollars a few months ago, the PA claimed that it could not afford to buy vaccines against COVID-19. So obviously it can afford to pay money to the families of terrorists.
So would the United States and Europe be willing to renew Trump-era sanctions in light of this?
Look, I think Israel, hopefully Israel will have a new government next week. And the new Israeli government, both the prime minister, the foreign minister, have first of all to renew and rebuild the dialogue with the Biden administration and spell out what is going to be Israel's policy regarding the Palestinians, and make it very clear to the Biden administration, in my opinion, that Israel is open to reopening dialogue with the Palestinians, but on the condition that this policy of pay for slay ends, and then, as I said, that Israel will not allow the Palestinian Authority to enjoy the best of two worlds.
I'm struggling to understand why the PA would abide by this, because it seems, I mean, they're already promising that they wouldn't, or that they would alter their pay for slay policy. So this is clearly a violation of that. Are they testing their boundaries?
I think they're testing the Biden administration very clearly. They're trying to find out what is going to be the reaction of the Biden administration. And precisely because Mahmoud Abbas is testing Biden, I think Biden and Foreign Secretary Blinken have to be very, very clear on that, that the United States, the new Biden administration, even though it is willing to undo some of the policies of the Trump administration, will not agree and will not allow the PA to encourage terrorism by paying huge amounts of money to families of terrorists. So to answer your question, yes, I think very clearly Mahmoud Abbas is testing the Biden administration, which is precisely why the reaction of the Biden administration has to be very, very clear, in my opinion.
All right, so it needs to be clear, and I think that we can maybe agree on that, but do you expect a harsh response? Because I think that that's really the heart of this question, or this discussion. Will the Biden administration hold strong, and what evidence is there to suggest that they will?
I think the reaction of the Biden administration will also be influenced by the position of the new and upcoming Israeli government. I think, in my opinion, if the new Israeli government, both the foreign minister and the prime minister, make it very clear, as I said before, to the Biden administration that Israel is willing to reopen dialogue with the PA, but on the condition that things change when it comes to encouraging terrorism and to paying money to the families of terrorists, I think this might make it easier for the Biden administration to adopt a very clear and tough stance vis-a-vis the PA on that specific issue. I think here the new and upcoming Israeli government has an important part to play vis-a-vis the Biden administration by spelling out very clearly what is Israel's position and what are Israel's red lines, as I said, with the new government, which hopefully will be sworn next week.
All right, Dr. Emmanuel Navon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on, the Gaza-based Palestinian terror group Hamas drawing ire from Israel again, this time with the release of explosive media Sunday evening. Published by the Qatari Al Jazeera news network, the media, including previously unseen footage of former Hamas captive Gilad Shalit, who was released in a prisoner exchange deal in 2011. That and an alleged audio recording of a current Israeli trapped by Hamas. In the recording, a man in broken Hebrew is claiming to be an Israeli soldier and is wondering if Israel still exists, adding that, quote, "I'm dying every day, but I feel the hope to be near family beating in my heart. Please help," end quote. Israeli officials, however, calling the stunt a cheap and transparent manipulation. For one, no Israeli soldiers are currently alive in Hamas captivity. Only the bodies of 2 soldiers killed in 2014, Hadar Golden and Oron Shaul, seen below, and 2 live civilians, Avraham Mengistu and Hisham al-Sayed, who allegedly suffer from mental illness and have been imprisoned by Hamas since 2015. Additionally, Hamas has not stated who the voice belongs to, and while the al-Sayed family has not yet responded to the recording, the Mengistu family has stated that the voice is not that of their son. Israel and Hamas are currently engaged in indirect ceasefire negotiations that include talks of a prisoner swap. Now, moving one step closer to full herd immunity, Israel celebrating its victory over the COVID-19 pandemic in an incredible ceremony overnight. Hannah Rifkin reporting.
כך נראית תמונת ניצחון. כך נראית תמונת ניצחון. מאות ישראלים יושבים יחד, שמחים יחד, מחייכים יחד, עדיין מסכות, אבל כפי ששוחחתי עכשיו עם שר הבריאות, זה עניין של זמן קצר מאוד, עד שניפטר גם מהדבר הזה.
In a massive showing of gratitude Sunday evening, Israel honoring its members of the healthcare system and other partnering bodies for their contributions towards the defeat of COVID-19 in Israel. And the ceremony including messages of praise from Health Minister Yuli Edelstein, Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, and Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, as well as a series of awards for various healthcare and vaccine dispersal groups.
יש לנו עד כה למעלה מ6 מיליוני אזרחים שהם מחוסנים ומחלימים. אנחנו ממשיכים לחסן. מהבוקר גם בני 12 עד 16, בשורה ענקית למדינת ישראל. פשוט ענקית. זה מבטיח חסינות עדר רשמית.
Meanwhile, as mentioned, Israel now extending its landmark vaccine campaign to youths aged 12 through 16, tens of thousands of whom have already signed up for their shots.
As a mother, you know, you always want the best for your children. And here too, I did not have concern because I was certain that this would be the best solution for my child, for my daughter. We are in a different place today here in Israel with the vaccines, and I know we are helping the entire community by getting the vaccination also for the youth.
Finally, with youths getting vaxxed and practically all other restrictions already lifted, Health Minister Edelstein hinting that the last remaining rule, the mask mandate, likely to be lifted by June 15th. The good news extending to all indoor spaces with the exception of schools, for now.
Finally, saving arguably the best news for last, the Israeli Ramat Gan Safari welcoming its newest member of the pack, or should I say the crash. 11-year-old Rhino Rihanna giving birth to her 3rd baby on Sunday, the 33rd Rhino to be born at the Israeli zoo, and the baby boy seen trotting alongside his proud mama in good health, the pair having been separated into a designated maternity zone for the next several weeks, or until the baby is strong enough to join the rest of the crew.
Today, you can see behind me Rihanna. She gave birth to a young male, which we still don't have a name for, but we're very excited. This species, the southern white rhinoceros, is endangered. It's near threatened. That's the specific risk level. But we're part of a very exciting group of breeding rhinos. This is our 33rd rhino that we're giving to nature.
The Ramat Gan Safari housing the Middle East's largest collection of wild animals, including lions, hippos, and elephants. And for obvious reasons, it's considered to be the world leader in rhino breeding. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Hannah Rifkin.
Now partly cloudy skies set for tonight and tomorrow, and looking at this evening's temperatures, lows are expected to be in the mid to upper teens in Celsius. Then Tuesday, highs still in the 20s and 30s depending on the area. And now back to the studio with Aaron.
That is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.25 shekels to the American dollar and 2.69 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.